Former spoiled rotten kids, when did the real world really hit you? I've had an odd experience. I grew up in extreme wealth, then went to living very humbly. I'm half Saudi, so I had maids all my young life. Practically wiped my ass. I remember whenever me and my bros got off the airplane and we were driven to the executive gold lounge. Basically, we were minted. However, my parents got divorced and my mother decided rightly I should live with her back in the UK. So I went from maids in a mansion where my bedroom was bigger than most people's entire floor, in the UK at least, to sharing a tiny bedroom with my brothers. I remember my first time washing dishes at school, and I did it with cold water and the other students laughed and said you're supposed to do it with warm hot water. I went from buying whatever I wanted to buying second-hand school clothes, but it was the best thing to happen to me ever because, holy crap, when I went back and met some of my old friends, their minds, they were just not normal people. This is when it really hit me, because I just saw how different they were. Fully grown men being catered for my maids in their old age. Do they have no shame? Rich coming from me, but hey, I mended my ways. Whenever I visit my father, I see my stepbro who continued being spoiled. 35-year-old man, never had a job, leeches off his mum. Our maid is like 60. She cleans his clothes, washes his dishes, might as well squeeze his ass cheeks whilst he takes a crap. I refuse to let the maid do anything and I give where I can from money I earned. To see such a difference is what made me grateful and hit me. I am so freaking glad I didn't continue growing up spoiled. Frankly, I didn't grow up poor either. My perspective of poverty was warped compared to real poverty. Our tiny shared bedroom was luxury. I've learned never to take anything for granted. I'm so glad I grew up normally. I couldn't stand the person I'd become if I continued growing up spoiled. I work hard now. I support my mother. I have pride, something I'd never have if I continued being a leech. Good for you, bro. It's so much more satisfying growing and having struggles, but knowing in the end that you will be a better person for yourself and the people around you. My roommate in college was a former Marine. He was basically like 1. I am not cleaning up this crap for you, and 2. This crap will be cleaned up. This wasn't me but my wife. She grew up well-to-do. I grew up in a trailer. Like, I can't watch Trailer Park Boys because it's too real trailer. We met in college, which took everything in my power to get to. She, on the other hand, had it all paid for. We met, fell in love, etc. The first break, I took her home to my parents. Again TPB, so drugs, dirty, dingy, broken trailer. She met everyone and was nice enough. That night, we went to bed and I woke up to her just sobbing. She had never realized how great she really had it and how broken and rough the world can be. As to where I was just thankful to be home with my family, on my nice bed, which in hindsight is the sketchiest thing ever. A bed no sheets and alcohol stains and all that crap. Had I known what I know now about the upper middle class wealthy world, I would have never taken her home until I knew her better. I was surprised she stayed with me. I just grew up thinking that the way I lived was perfectly normal, until I met her parents. The ellipses at the end have people wondering on her parents. I mentioned in the comments, but they're your typical white, college educated, church going, rich white people who own land in northern VA and have a really nice house, wear formal wear to house dinners, parties are big deals with a lot of decorum, etc. Also commas. My dad grew up in a trailer and I showed him the boys last time he visited. He said, you know, it's a bit exaggerated, but not as much as you'd think. First time I went a week living on beans and ramen because that's what was in the house and I didn't have any money. I learned that in the real world, everything is not just handed to you. I'm still a bit spoiled and I still have issues with prioritizing expenditures, but I'm much better than I was when I was 21. I'm 23 and realized yesterday that I have $50 to get me through the next 10 days after paying rent. I have a lot of ramen in my near future, and I just bought a Nintendo Switch. I'm still figuring out this prioritizing expenditures thing too. I grew up in a Midwestern town, middle class neighborhood, private school, etc. I never needed anything, but my dad grew up poor and my parents wouldn't give in to any of my big wants. Super Nintendo I never got. Haha, my neighbor and best friend got everything he asked for. I loved hanging at his house because he had the best TV, the best food, the newest video games, 100 pairs of shoes and 1000 hats. After we moved away, I found out that his parents gave him anything he wanted because they were in a loveless marriage and constantly fought around him. They were buying love when my parents were showing me love. I always wondered why he would prefer to stay at my house with a crappy TV and an outdated Nintendo with no games. Turns out he wanted to stay at our house because my parents didn't fight and would actually listen to him. My parents became surrogate parents for him and to this day he calls them mom and dad. I'm happy to call him brother. If it weren't for him, I would never have known how I won the parental lottery. I grew up with my mother doing everything for me. I was never taught many things because she would do everything. She's an amazing mother, don't get me wrong, but I wish I was taught more. Well, I have a job now where I take care of mentally disabled adults. You basically have to do everything. You have to do all of the cooking, all of the cleaning, all of the laundry, and you have to shower clients and change their clothes and diapers. Some of them can change themselves. I'd say that this job is helping me a lot. It's giving me more experience in the real world and a great opportunity to help my patients and spend time with them. I wasn't necessarily spoiled, but I definitely grew up in a very privileged family. Upper middle class, academic dad and lawyer mum. I was 17 and I got a job as a porter at a hotel to save and travel for a bit before going to uni. My dad lives in Singapore, so I figured Asia. I went to Indonesia, Yogyakarta to see Borobudur, and I was staying in a decent but not crazy fancy hotel near the temple. It was my first night and I had no idea if tipping was the normal thing and didn't have any rupiah on me, so I put a US $5 bill under my plate when I left. Working in a hotel you get foreign currency tips. The note was worth more as a novelty tbh. As the waitress cleared the plates and I was walking away, she freaked out, thinking I had left it there. She didn't speak a lot of English, but I got it across that it was a tip and she basically broke down. It was frick all money, so I was really confused. Made the mistake of googling median wages of the area when I got back. Median, not even minimum. Salary is about $3,000 a year. What I made in about 2 hours at a minimum wage hotel job, she made in a week busting butt for 80 hours. I tipped well all through my trip. Even bought the crappy knickknacks from the hawkers by the temple. It was freaking gutting. Since someone asked why I knew a tiny bit about Indonesia, this was my first trip. In uni I've been studying primatology and human biology, and I've done field work in Java. Went back to Borobudur and got better photos. And Sumatra. I've traveled to quite a few countries now, most of which are relatively or severely impoverished like Ethiopia and rural highland Peru. And I'm convinced that that first trip to Indonesia colored how I view the world. I realized that some people really struggle with money. I thought people didn't buy things they need, cars, appliances, clothes, a nice house, because they were really frugal and saving up. It's not even that I didn't know about poverty, but I thought it was a third world thing and that everyone in the US is pretty comfortable. This didn't sink in until college. I'm terrified for after college. Military boot camp. Wanted to eat an orange. Didn't know how to peel one. Slyly waited for someone else to start peeling before emulating him. End up with a badly squashed, untidily peeled orange ball that tasted like sour reality. Boom. Evolved. Clarification. If given the choice, I usually don't eat oranges. Not a fan of the taste. And some of you are right. On rare occasions that I ate oranges, they are usually peeled by someone else or packaged in wedges or juiced. This was basic military training in Singapore. During training, boy was I hungry like a vampire at a blood bank, and the fruit of the day was oranges. Whole, unpeeled orangey balls of untouchable glory. The trick was to eat my food relatively slow enough, which is still pretty damned fast considering mealtime was borderline 10 minutes, so that I didn't finish my food too early and end up staring at my orange as if it's an alien's testicle. And I can peel oranges by hand with relative ease now. I had a buddy in 8 who didn't know how to eat one either. Regular guy, just didn't know how. He took a bite of it without peeling it or anything. We all had a good laugh at that one. I grew up in Indonesia, a third world country where you'd definitely have maids if you're posting on Reddit. I grew up thinking it's common to have multiple maids. Moved to Singapore, a first world country where people still have maids. but it's more of an upper middle class and above thing. Got assigned to sweep the floors by the teachers, and that was my first time holding a broom. Swept it back and forth like in cartoons, and everyone was looking at me going, "What the frick are you doing?" Turns out I was just creating a dust cloud around me. You have to sweep in one direction and gather all the dust into the dustpan. Mind blown. I was raised by my great grandmother. She was well to do, active well into her 80s, and her world revolved around me. Ballet, gymnastics, all the music classes I could fit in my schedule. I had a menagerie of pets. Christmases were obscene. She catered to my every whim as a child. Now that I'm an adult and my wonderful gram has passed, I've learned that what I had was really unique. The world does not wait on me. I'm not special to everyone. I struggle with entitlement and narcissistic tendencies. It's isolating at times and I miss her. The easiest way to get lots of positive attention is to be outwardly humble, kind, and gracious with people. You just have to minimize your ego. Same destination, different paths. I grew up in a small town and my parents were not rich, but they had me late in life and were both retired. They were living off of my dad's pension. I had them both at home all day every day. Dad focused all of his energy on parenting, which meant I had a problem solver at home all the time with nothing to do but solve problems for me. Whatever went wrong, he could usually make it go away. He told my mom I shouldn't have to get a job in high school because he is going to have a job every day for the rest of his life. Let him enjoy this, even if he doesn't understand right now. So I spent my teenage years hanging out, playing video games, and working semi-hard at school. Then I went to college not too far from home. Dad paid to put me up in the swanky dorm and I would go home every weekend to get my clothes washed and such. Then Dad died. Within about 2 months' time, I lost my dad and my mother informed me she was going to move back to where her family was from. Then sold my childhood home and moved away. I found out what rent costs. I found out what food costs. I found out what utilities cost. I learned about the laundromat. I got into a wreck. Guy came over a blind hill in my lane. Replaced the car my dad bought me with a crappy here's what you can afford car. I had 1 or 2 good friends who stuck by me and helped teach me how the world works and dealt with my issues related to grief. Good friends. Grew up in a fancy home. More rooms than you could ever need on a large property in a pretty rural area. I got everything I wanted whenever I wanted. Huge plasma TV, DSLR camera, motorbike, pony, etc. I never knew what my parents really did for a living. I remember kids always asking what my parents did as a job in the playground and I never really knew how to respond. I soon figured out what my parents did when my dad was arrested for drug trafficking in the house. Cars and everything else was repossessed by the government as profits of crime. I now live in a crappy house that barely stands in a dodgy area of town. It definitely was a shock to the system, but I'm adjusting just fine, I guess. When I was 16, my parents left for a week vacation and gave me money for the week. Since I didn't know how to do laundry, never even seen it done, I took all my clothes to the dry cleaner, even my panties. The cleaners asked 3 times if I was sure I wanted them dry cleaned. I said yes. 2 days later I got 8 pair of panties safety pinned to individual hangers. My laundry cost about $90 that week. I just assumed this was all normal. Real world hit me only much later. It's only in retrospect I see I was spoiled. Sort of around when I had a limited allowance and budget in college. I was spoiled but not rich. More naive than anything. We get a lot of guests at my hotel who do this. We have one guest who routinely had $200 worth of dry cleaning. It's almost cheaper to just buy new socks, underwear, etc. I was a spoiled rotten child and also into my teen years. My parents bought me a brand new red convertible for my 16th birthday. I threw a fit over it because what I actually wanted was my brother's old car that we still had, which was dark blue in color. I was so shallow and a horrible person back then. So what really turned me around? That next summer I took a job as a camp counselor at a local day camp. I did not have to work, but I was bored and sounded like something easy to do. God, I was so wrong. This day camp was specifically geared to the lower classes who could not afford childcare during the summer. We served them breakfast, lunch, and an afternoon snack. For a lot of the camp kids this was all they would eat that day, and on Fridays they would beg for extra food snacks to take home for themselves and or their siblings because they may not get to eat again until Monday. This really hit me hard, but the part that got me the most, this one kid, around 5'6", would refuse to take their shoes and socks off, even if we were going to the public pool that day. I couldn't understand why until one day he came in limping, like his feet were causing him so much pain. I convinced him to let me help him get his shoes and socks so I could see what might be bothering him. Once I did, it took everything in me not to break down right there. His socks were covered in blood. His poor tiny little feet were covered in sores and his toes seemed to curl under a bit. He was in so much pain from the state of his feet. As it turns out, he had been wearing shoes about 3 sizes too small. His family couldn't afford new shoes. I took my lunch break and went out to buy him new socks and a few pairs of shoes. This broke me, which I definitely needed. It changed my way of thinking forever. Wow, I'm glad it changed you. I'm sure you changed that little boy's life for the better. From the subcontinent, things went downhill after I got into an engineering university. Mom had to sell her wedding jewelry to get me through the semester. Now here I am, thinking I should get her some gold jewelry because now I can. Mom, I love you. Do it. At 20, when I started dating my now husband, he was raised by a single mom who worked 3 jobs and they still barely got by, while my mom was a Sam and my dad was as successful in his line of work. Husband and I went to high school together. At the beginning of every school year my parents would easily drop $15K on me and my sister for school clothes. My husband would go with our HS secretary to get clothes that were paid for by the school district. I didn't even know that was a thing. Yes, I am aware and I agree that this is a stupid amount of money to spend on clothing. To clarify, a large portion of that amount was spent on designer items, accessories. I have no idea why we went to the same school. I wasn't in charge of creating the imaginary dividing lines of our city. My husband and I have known each other for years and were always friends. We got together a couple years after high school for a drunken night complaining about exes, and discovered we share a lot of the same ideals about relationships in general. We moved in together 3 weeks later, lol. Yes, he makes decent money now, and yes, he's handsome as frick. Sometimes I just stare at him and I'm just like, how? Also, my parents are wealthy, I am not. We live modestly, and have very little wiggle room every month. But I truly and honestly don't give a crap because we are really freaking happy. $15K for clothes. Everything I own combined is barely worth that, lol. When I was removed from my parents and put through a year of foster heck, sadly, my brother didn't get the same rude awakening I did. Spez. We were in the same foster house. It's just he didn't fully grasp that the world doesn't revolve around him, while I mostly have. I'm still trying to fight off some demons from both eras. I grew up living in a huge hotel, kind of like your Sweet Life of Zack and Cody thing, except that I was a spoiled young kid. When I was 7, I'd have a nanny put on my socks, wear my school uniform every day, etc. I had 4 nannies before that and they all left. I made one cry once because I yelled at her for not helping me with my math homework. I slapped another one. She left 3 months later. It hit me hard a year or 2 later when my dad had to travel overseas to work, so I was stuck with that one particular nanny named Stina. My dad didn't really send a lot of money back to us, and so we had to live in a cramped apartment since we needed to move out of that particular hotel. I hated my nanny at the beginning because she was just so dang strict. Turns out that she was doing this because she wanted us to change. And we did. Because my dad didn't send enough money and didn't want a stingy guy, we had to ration our food on some days, and I couldn't go to many school activities because we didn't have a car like we used to. And we didn't have enough money. This was hard on my brother and I because we went to a private international school, so it was really hard not trying to show others our personal struggle. It was even harder on me as I was a prefect at that school, and so not attending school activities, extracurricular stuff was the worst. During that period, I learned so much and begun to empathize properly. I learned to socialize with my neighbors, be independent, and this made me enjoy my childhood living in that apartment more than I ever did living in a hotel. I owe it all to my nanny, to be honest. I consider her my surrogate mom now, regardless of the rough beginning, and I, honest to God, would not have changed one single bit if it wasn't for her. Now, I wouldn't say I was spoiled by any means, but I sure as heck was lazy as frick. When I eventually moved out on my own, the word consequences meant nothing to me. It took me nearly starving a couple of times, including a particularly unpleasant 3 weeks in which I did some things I'm not very proud of, and eventually getting kicked out on my butt to learn my lesson. I was taken in and given a job by the family of a guy I barely knew from high school, and we're close as brothers now. But to this day I'm still working on paying back the kindness of friends I don't deserve who paid my rent multiple times. Got to college and my roommate washed his plastic silverware for reuse. He'd never held an actual metal fork. Plastic was cheaper. I've bought forks from a thrift store before. I don't believe you. Well, I believe it happened, but they're dirt cheap. I never had a job until the age of 19. Up until this age I assumed people started working when they felt like it. As in, you wake up one day and say, hey, you know what? I feel like working now. I'll go sign up to this company of my choice, and I'm going to choose to work this amount of hours per week. Fast forward 3 years and due to parental abandonment I have no car, no education, will soon have no place to live, no license and no work skills, because I never had to. Dad worked for someone and that someone promised to sell him the company. When the day actually came, he sold the company to someone else and my dad quit his job. We were broke and I could no longer ask for things. We almost went bankrupt and nearly sold the house. Dad started his own company and we're still in debt. Haven't had enough money for anything and I have to make do with $12 for a week or even 2 sometimes. I'm in college now and it's still the same. We live in Malaysia BTW. I remember when I was 12, my dad was broke and we sat in a small stall to eat. He didn't have enough money to eat but promised me that we would have a life that's secure. I'm in college today and pretty thankful for that despite the lack of money. I tend to make do here and there. I grew up very privileged. When I look back on it, I never even appreciated it. When I was 17 I came out and went from privilege to getting kicked out and living on the street. That was some years ago now and I've made a pretty amazing life for myself. In fact, I'm almost 100% positive that I'm better off than if I kept on my previous track. In every way. Between junior and senior year of HS, got a job at a local tire shop because I liked cars and manual work, and needed beer money. I was a straight A student and actually prided myself on being a hard worker, but didn't really understand the degree to which no one gives a crap what your problem or excuse is. This work needs to get done. 2 moments stick in my memory almost 20 years later. Mexican probably legal co-worker asks me, what do they teach you in school? Because you can't work for crap. Dude was working 6 nearly 11-hour days per week and I was barely doing 40 hours. I fricked something up in the shop. Think it was mounting white walls, the opposite of the customer's request, and the shop manager was calling me an idiot for it. I said something like, you know I have a 4.2 GPA, right, to which he responded, I don't give a crap. Quit screwing up. In those moments I came to realize my golden boy gifted status didn't excuse me from getting the freaking job done right, no matter how simple I should be. Actually ushered in an attitude of reverse snobbery against upper middle class and above people and their incredible helplessness. TLDR. Privileged gifted kid gets job at tire shop, learns what real work is and that no one assumes he's special. Yep. Once high school ends it doesn't matter if you aced all the AP classes they offered. Now you're just an adult like all the rest of the sad saps and no one is going to look at you differently for being smart. Even if you do tell them what your GPA is. By far cringiest moment of that story. Glad you're not that guy anymore. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.